Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the dark, incredibly bleak depths of the Tales of the Black Freighter to unpack the true, terrible cost of heroic obsession. If you've ever wondered how a completely noble mission can just rot from the inside out, well, you're in exactly the right place. So keep this question in the back of your mind as we go. What happens when saving the world costs your very soul? We're exploring this chilling story within a story because it's a grim, almost perfect reflection of a superhero's descent. We're going to see how the line between savior and monster isn't just blurred, it's completely obliterated. Here's our roadmap for the breakdown today. We'll start out with the story within a story, then examine the building of the corpse raft, track the mariner's descent into madness, break down the tragedy of misperception, and finally witness his ultimate transformation. All right, let's jump right into part one, a story within a story acting as the mirror of moral decay. The whole psychological framework here is built on heroic obsession. It's that terrifying state where pursuing the greater good actually warps a self-proclaimed savior into a literal monster. We're not just talking about making, tough choices. We're looking at how a relentless drive to do the right thing can fundamentally rot a person's core. You can really map the mariner's tragic journey across 4 distinct acts on a timeline like this. It's essentially an inverted hero's journey. From the initial shipwreck on day 1, through weeks at sea, a disastrous midnight return, and finally a dark dawn. This moral decay doesn't just happen overnight. It is a slow, agonizing slide into the abyss. Which brings us to our second section, building the corpse raft, or the justified atrocity. At the very start of his ordeal, after surviving a brutal attack by that phantom pirate ship, the mariner genuinely sees himself as a selfless savior. He becomes absolutely obsessed with one goal, warning his family in Davidstown. His motivation is purely love and protection. But he decides he has to do it at any cost. And man, those 3 little words, at any cost, that is exactly where the trap snaps shut on his soul. And just think about the sheer, horrific symbolism of what happens next. He literally builds a raft out of the bloated corpses of his own fallen shipmates to cross the ocean. It's the ultimate moral compromise, right? Riding on the backs of the dead just to save the living. It shows us exactly what happens when the mission itself becomes more important than actual human life. In his warped mind, using human beings as tools is completely justified because the end goal is survival. Now, the parallel here is undeniable. The mariner's macabre raft perfectly mirrors Adrian Vate's early mindset. Just as the mariner uses his dead friends as a literal stepping stone for his journey, Vate looks at humanity as a whole and just calculates the acceptable losses for his grand design. Both of these guys are dead certain that they are the only ones with the willpower to commit terrible atrocities in order to save everybody else. Moving on to Section 3, the descent into madness, brought on by the absolute rot of isolation. Out there on the water, entirely stripped of his civilized life, the mariner starts taking these really agonizing steps downward. It all starts with isolation. Being utterly alone with his fear is the direct trigger that causes his grip on reality to just slip away. I mean, by the time he's surviving by eating raw seagulls and drinking seawater, he's totally unmoored. His external physical deterioration is a direct reflection of his internal moral rot. And that singular focus on his enemy, it breeds this massive paranoia that completely severs his connection to humanity. And that paranoid focus blinds him entirely to the monster he's becoming. This perfectly captures the psychological isolation of the Watchmen themselves. Think about Dr. Manhattan's literal detachment up on Mars, or Veidt isolating himself in his ivory tower in Antarctica. Extreme isolation simply erodes empathy. When you distance yourself that far from the very people you claim to protect, they stop being real people to you and just become abstract statistics. Let's dive into Section 4, the tragedy of misperception, which is where the fatal delusion takes hold. Against all odds, the mariner actually makes it home to the shores of Davidstown. The goal is achieved, right? Well, no. His mind is so deeply warped by trauma at this point that his perception is entirely broken. He looks at his quiet, innocent hometown and genuinely sees a place that's already been conquered by the Black Freighter. He literally perceives the innocent townsfolk as the terrifying invaders he's been obsessing over for weeks. And this leads to an utterly heartbreaking sequence of events. In his desperate frenzy to save his family, he actually becomes their destroyer. He breaks into his own home, dead of night, and viciously attacks what he thinks is a monstrous intruder.
And then comes the ultimate, crushing irony. He realizes, entirely too late, that he has just murdered his own wife. The very person he sacrificed his sanity to save is destroyed by his own terrifying hands.
This devastating moment highlights the fatal flaw in Veidt's grand master plan, executing a massive sacrifice based entirely on a tragic misperception. You have the mariner's micro-tragedy, murdering the woman he loves in a twisted attempt to save her, acting as a direct mirror to Veidt's macro-tragedy of slaughtering millions for a utopian peace that might just be a total delusion. Both men force incredibly violent solutions onto a world that they fundamentally misperceived through the lens of their own arrogance and trauma. Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, the final transformation into the damned savior. So, fleeing his blood-soaked home, the mariner swims back out into the dark ocean, and he finally looks up and sees the black freighter waiting there. But it wasn't coming for Davidstown, it was waiting for him. He finally realizes that his terrifying obsession, his gruesome corpse raft, the murder of his wife, it was all just an initiation. He didn't save a single soul, he simply transformed into the exact horror he thought he was fighting. Realizing he no longer belongs with the living, he climbs aboard the pirate ship and accepts his place among the damned. This incredibly chilling resolution perfectly parallels the ending of the main story, proving once and for all that saving the world often demands that you become a monster to do it. The mariner accepting his fate on that phantom ship is exactly like the main heroes agreeing to keep Veidt's horrific secret. Their morals are completely compromised. They are forced to live with the heavy, rotting guilt of their monstrous actions, knowing their hands are forever stained with innocent blood, all supposedly for the greater good. So, I want to leave you with this final haunting question to chew on long after this explainer is over. If the entire foundation of your righteous crusade is built on corpses, isolation, and paranoia, is a peace built on a delusion really worth the ultimate sacrifice? What exactly have you saved? And more importantly, what have you become in the process? Thanks for exploring this brilliant dark narrative with us today. Keep analyzing the text, and we'll see you in the next explainer.